Hello and welcome to the Business of Winning podcast, brought to you by Performance Insights, providing expert speakers and hosts from the world of Formula One motor racing to corporate events and conferences worldwide. Just click on www.performanceinsights.co.uk and send us your requirements.
So you're all very welcome to the Business of Winning podcast, and great pleasure to have the chance to share with you a few insights from one or two more really interesting people from the world of Formula One. I hope all of you as listeners are really enjoying and have enjoyed the 2024 season, arguably one of the most fascinating seasons in the Formula One World Championship history, really. And this really brings me to our guest for this episode, Julien Simon-Chautemps. Now, some of you will know of Julien. If you're a Kimi Räikkönen fan, you're going to know Julien because he rather famously was the engineer who enjoyed and endured some of the wonderful radio conversations which we used to hear between Kimi and Julien during their time together at Alfa Romeo Racing. But let me give you a little bit of background on Julien. He's a highly experienced Formula One performance engineer, 25 years in this business all told. Initially worked in Formula One for the huge Toyota Formula One team based in Cologne in Germany. He then went from there to from one end of the spectrum to the other to the startup team at Caterham, then joined Lotus and was there through its transition into becoming Renault's Formula One contender. And then he moved to Hinwil in Switzerland to work with Sauber Motorsport and that famous Alfa Romeo Racing program, which we know so well, and of course, which included the great Kimi Räikkönen and the final years of his career. I think we can call him an enigmatic Finn, but under Julien's guidance, Ferrari's 2007 world champion achieved some notable successes at Alfa Romeo prior to bringing his career to a close in 2021. Julien has since then gone on to do a couple of things. First of all, he's got his own motorsport consultancy service, which is JSC7 Engineering, which provides a wide range of engineering services to the motorsport industry. But he also is well known, particularly to French-speaking Formula One audiences, through his expertise that he shares with media broadcasters in Formula One. So great to have Julien join us on the Business of Winning podcast. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. And just one final thing to point out, there is a little bit of interference on Julien's line. We have tried to filter out any audio interference. So if you do notice that, please don't worry. We are aware of it. And I hope it doesn't interrupt your enjoyment too much. Well, Julien, it's a great pleasure to have you on the Performance Insights podcast. And the first thing I really want to say is, how are you getting on this year, and how much are you enjoying Formula One at the moment? Because it's been a very interesting season so far.
Well, first of all, thanks, Mark, for having me in your podcast. I'm doing very well. Thank you very much, apart the weather, but that I cannot do anything about it. F1 this season, has been great. I mean, it looked like when you look at the first races of the season, it would have been like a complete victory pass for Red Bull and Max. But it turns out that McLaren just woke up and basically introduced some very precious updates. And now they are the team to watch. They are the team winning with Lando. And I think it has added a bit of spice and something very important for the people, that to show that actually not always the same team is winning. You know what I mean? I think it add a lot of interest to the sport, which is growing and growing every year. Yeah. But the last thing people wanted is again Max winning all 24 races, and that would have been damaging, let's say, for the for the interest of the sport. So all in all, I think a great season.
Tell me your opinion about the fact that Adrian Newey now admits that he decided after Suzuka to leave Red Bull Racing. And of course, we all know he's now moving to Aston Martin, joining in a few months' time. And it's very noticeable that Red Bull's performances seem to have slipped in the months that followed Adrian's decision. Where do you stand on the reason for Red Bull losing its competitive advantage? Has this got nothing to do with Adrian leaving, or has it got maybe everything to do with Adrian leaving? Very interested to hear your opinion on that.
Actually, I'm not going to try to diminish Adrian, fame and what he has achieved in the sport, but it's fair to say that, I mean, F1 in the 90s is not F1 anymore now. You know what I mean? It's not a single man show anymore. And I mean, a lot of people have said it, but I'm a firm believer that the Formula One team need a very good technical director, but he's not doing everything on his own. Adrian has a lot of, he had a lot of people around him, very good people in Red Bull. I'm thinking of, Vacher as a technical director. He has a lot of really good guys in aero, and I doubt he would have been able to win all this championship on his own. You know what I mean? So yes, he's a good, extremely important guy in our organization, but he's not the only answer to the success. You know what I mean? And now, why Red Bull hasn't been competitive? I think what happened at the beginning of the season is that, let's hold back a little bit. I mean, Red Bull was winning relatively easy, very easily in 2023, so last year. The rules haven't changed that much for 24, so you know what I mean. If you look at the development path of F1 team, is quite flat because yes, you can improve a little bit, but it's quite difficult to make huge improvements. And they clearly try to improve from an already very good winning car, and they probably got the wrong way at one point or another. There was advertised they introduced a new floor. I think it was in race 3, I think China. It didn't go the right way, but Max kept winning, so they kind of brushed it off. You know what I mean? But actually, Perez was struggling even more. So that I think was they probably took a wrong path on that. And add to that everything that happened at the beginning with Christian and all the what happened internally, and for having been part of a team such, you're talking about 1,000 people, for sure he has influenced people negatively. And I wouldn't be surprised to hear that a big part of Adrian's decision was what happened with Christian at the beginning of the year and how the whole story was dealt with. I'm not here to judge, and it's not my position to judge, but I know a lot of people in Red Bull, and I know for a fact that it had an impact on how people worked and what they thought about, and for sure it had a negative impact.
So this actually leads me into a topic which I was going to leave until the end of our conversation, but we'll bring it up to the front, and that's about the importance of team culture and team spirit. You've spent your entire career working in motorsport, most of it working in Formula One. And of course, you're an engineer, so you see it as fundamentally a technical exercise. But what's your opinion of the importance of team culture, honesty and respect between people, and the way they collaborate as a team in order to deal with the challenge of Formula One?
What people don't realize, they see the 100+ people at the racetrack, but working on a car, and they say, okay, they operate 2 cars, and that's it. But actually, it's a very small part of a team operation. You're talking about, for the biggest team, up to 1,500 people. If you have the chassis, the engine, the aero, is a lot of people. So the team culture is fundamental. So the team culture, it could be a team culture of winning. How do you continue winning when you win all the time? Or it could be, how do you find motivation when you're at the back of the grid to keep, you know what I mean? And these are important subjects, how to find the motivation when you know you will arrive at a Grand Prix and you will be last. Look at Sauber this year, how they keep going. And that's very, very important, to have a strong team culture of continuous improvement, of trying to make little gain, even if you're talking about thousands of a second, but that gain that bring you in the correct path. You know what I mean? So team culture is absolutely fundamental for me.
Julien, you came into motorsport directly from university. I know that some of our young listeners will be interested to know about your journey. I was very lucky to do the same thing. I came into racing straight from university, and I just wanted to talk about your personal motivations and how you achieved that objective of, first of all, going into junior Formula and then through to Formula One?
Well, there is one word to describe it, is passion. You can't do this job without passion. So I've always been passionate since I'm probably 8 years old, when my dad brought me to Monaco Grand Prix to watch these Formula One cars going into the street of Monaco. That was when I realized, wow, that was mid 80s. I still remember the smell of the oil, the brakes, the tires, the noise, and that's when the passion started. Because you cannot do a job like this one without passion. It's not like a normal, everyday job. You have to have passion, because there's so many hours, there's so many, problem that you could have when you do this job, that if passion doesn't exist, you go nowhere. So basically, I always driven my career towards that. So what I've done is that I've done a mechanical engineering school in Paris that actually was specialized in aeronautical and aerospace. But first of all, I want to say the school you do, in my opinion, doesn't make a huge difference. You know what I mean? What the chance I had is that in this school they gave me the scientific knowledge, the scientific basis to understand, aerodynamic principle, all these kind of things. But they push the student a lot to do a lot of internship. And during a 5 years program, I must have done nearly 24 months of internship in total. So when I was ready to go into the work environment, I already had a small experience, quite a lot actually. And that made a huge, huge difference. So I encourage strongly the people to, call your local karting team, call your local, Formula 4 team near you and say, okay, I'm coming over the weekend, can I help? And that will help you grow as an experience. So that's how it all started.
I couldn't agree with you more. I often get asked by young people what's the best way to get in, which qualifications, and I always say, similar to what you just mentioned, it's always great to do those internships or to help someone at a weekend and get some experience and learn about the environment. Let's move on to your Formula One career. Let's start with Toyota. Talk to me about Toyota, because it's something that I know a little bit about. I met with Toyota at the beginning of their Formula One program. I was at Jordan, and in fact, we tried to get Toyota to provide engines to us to replace Honda. And I remember going over to Cologne and being completely blown away by the factory and the scale of the Toyota operation. How was that for you? Talk to us about your time at Toyota.
Well, I joined Toyota at the end of 2007, and I was coming from a GP2/Formula 2 team at the time. So, I pushed really, really hard to get into F1. And I remember my first interview, I had prepared a really thorough PowerPoint presentation that I had printed. And I remember giving it to the head of HR that was doing the interview at the time. And that was the chief engineer, Dieter Gass, who did my first interview. And basically, I had prepared like 20 slides on what did I learn in F2, how I could apply that in Formula One. And at the time, I think I'm proud to say they were quite blown away, because no candidate ever done this kind of presentation in interview, and I got the job. And I started in a test team at the end of 2007. So we had, who did we have? I think we had Franck Montagnier, actually, funnily enough, as a test driver at the time. And so I started in what they call in the past the test team. So before our days, teams were having a proper race team, a proper test team, completely separate. And I moved quickly to the race team. I think after 3 months, they liked the job I was doing, so they offered me a role as a performance engineer in the race team. So I remember starting with Jarno Trulli as his main performance guy, let's say. And talking about Toyota, the organization was mad. They had like 2 scale 1 wind tunnel. It was just offices everywhere. There was the engine department. It was such a huge. We had bicycle. Actually, the factory was so big. We had bicycle to go from one end to another. You know what I mean? So when you come from an F2 team, is a huge, huge change. But to be fair with them, they always treated the people extremely well. I remember we had a bus coach to go from the factory to the airport, and it was like a typical football coach. But we had a Recaro seat like the one I have. We had like PlayStation with a TV coming up and down. Honestly, they always had they put a lot of money in the operation, but they were always making sure the people were feeling good, and that was very important. We were talking about team culture before. So I always thought they were treating the employee really well. We had, for example, a beautiful canteen with an outdoor terrace with a lot of choice of food. So all details that might sound a bit useless, but at the end of the day, they really try to push. And for me, it was amazing to get into such a big structure and to get onto the race team so quickly.
I'm sure people have asked you this question before, but why do you think Toyota's Formula One program never achieved its ambition in terms of winning, and certainly not winning consistently? What was your observation, particularly now, all these years later, you get to look back at that time, because it was surprising to many people that this super successful car manufacturer slightly struggled with the demands of Formula One.
Well, I think they arrived with endless budget, nearly. We had no budget cap at the time, so the team could spend. The only limitation, I think, to remember was the amount of money you needed left at the end of the tax year from Japan. And actually, they had to pay a lot of money, you know what I mean? And they brought a lot of money on the plate. Unfortunately, I think, I don't want to blame anyone, but probably from the top management, the things were not doing very well, you know what I mean? Because Toyota arrived with a very, with all their process, like the continuous improvements, which work phenomenally well in a car industry. They try to apply all their knowledge and all their this kind of process to the normal Formula One team. Unfortunately, it doesn't work this way in Formula One. In Formula One, you need answer yesterday. You know what I mean? You don't have time to put process in place that will see us grow in 6 months. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And all this demand of, let's say, urgency of, you have a problem, immediately resolve the problem, focus on performance, and that have always been very, very difficult. And also fair to say that they never really had the full package. When I say full package, they never had the car, the engine, the driver all together performing at their best. You know what I mean? The best year we probably did was probably 2009 when we had the special flow. You remember the double diffuser? There we go. That's Brown as well had on their car. And here the car was extremely performance. But I remember a meeting we had at the beginning of 2009 that was head by John Howard. And so he gathered all the people and he said, guys, we have to win this year. Podium will not be enough. If we don't win, Toyota will not continue. And he made it very clear from the beginning of the year. And unfortunately, in this season, I think we did 3 or 4 podium, but we never won again. And at the end of the season, Toyota decided to pull out, which is a shame because the next year's car from the data in the wind tunnel would have been absolutely amazing. I think we were 20% more downforce. It would have been an amazing car, but we will never know. So they just decided to pull the plug. Also, we had a financial crisis in 2008, you remember? So there was a lot of political, let's say, force behind to close the motorsport program. So yeah, all in all, a lot of money invested and not much success.
You mentioned a couple of things there which are really important, and I often find corporate clients are really interested in, and that is the sense of urgency with which we do our work in Formula One. It's a relentless calendar, 24 races now, of course. So every week, every fortnight, you have to deliver. It definitely drives a mentality, doesn't it? In terms of you've got to get the job done. There's no chance to relax, and that actually can either bring a team together or it can actually introduce tension into a team because everyone's under so much pressure.
Yeah, but the pressure, I would say, you need to have pressure. You know what I mean? That's what drives you forward. And I don't think the pressure was a big issue. But you're completely right, Mark, saying that this sense of urgency that at the time probably in Toyota wasn't met or was met the wrong way. Or saying, I remember talking to the chief designer at the time and saying, okay, why the car is heavy? Can we not shave some weight? And we had discussion, yeah, but you understand the safety is important. So if I use a safety factor normally of 1.3, 1.4, I will use it 1.8. So like this, I will make sure everything will pass. And you know what I mean? And all these kind of little details were a bit of a problem as a culture for the team. And maybe they were missing a bit of racing spirit. You know what I mean? It's like people on the pit wall. We had a lot of experienced people, don't get me wrong, but maybe should I relate it to what's happening with Ferrari at the moment, where people are maybe a bit scared of taking a decision because there is a big machine behind, a big corporation, and I think that's always been a break a bit in their in the performance of the team.
Yeah. I can see this podcast lasting about 3 hours because you keep introducing really, really interesting new points. And the one that you just mentioned about people being slightly afraid, you know, it seizes up the decision making. The decision making doesn't flow. Very, very interesting point. Maybe we'll talk about that in a few moments. I want to move on to the kind of next phase of your career, because you went from the biggest team Formula One had ever seen up until that point, which was Toyota. You went to Caterham, and my old pal Tony Fernandez, of course, set up the team. And I just wondered about that experience. Small team, startup team, very, very different set of challenges for you as an engineer, and also expectations.
Well, yes, absolutely. So I went with the team with the most money, probably, to the team with the least money. I remember Mike Gascon doing interview in an hotel in Cologne Airport, interviewing every single employee of Toyota because they were all made redundant. My interview lasted probably 6 minutes, and I was taken on board. And actually, the entire race team from Toyota went to Caterham. That's important, including Jarno. So Dieter Gas, Gianluca, all the race engineer, the chief engineer, everybody moved there. But I remember I moved from Cologne to close to Norwich, Norfolk, where the team was based. That was in January 2010, and I remember arriving in the office, and the whole thing was brand new. We still had wire hanging up down the ceiling, and then someone gave me a laptop and said, "Here we go." So I opened the laptop. I had Word and Excel in it. That's it. There was nothing else. We had no software, no procedure, nothing, zero, nada. So I spent the first 3 months just creating, like setup sheet, set down sheet, job list, a procedure, because we had nothing, and I could not get anything from what I had from Toyota, obviously. So I had to recreate everything from scratch. So that was an extremely high challenge for me, but really good, because then I could, apply the knowledge I had learned from Toyota and say, okay, take the good thing we were applying, leave out all the bad thing, going straight to the point. And to be fair, we put together a car, also thanks to Mike, because you will like him or not, but to be fair with him, we managed to put a car on track in Bahrain at race 1 within only a few months, and that was, astonishing.
It was. I think you got the go ahead in September, and you were on track for the start of the season, which is just insane. 6 months.
I mean, everything put in place was unbelievable, but we did it, and so that was quite an interesting experience. But
and do you think small teams work better than large teams in terms of communication, camaraderie, team spirit?
Yeah, you have less people to deal with, you know what I mean? So in terms of, when you want something, you go straight to the designer, it does that. So in terms of efficiency of work, they work really, really well, and much better probably than big team when you have to ask, 2 or 3 different line manager to obtain something. So in this sense, yes, they do work better. The problem of small team is usually the resources. Not having the best wind tunnel or the best engine bench or the best tools to improve the car. But in terms of the way people work, yes, there is this efficiency part, which is really good.
Now, you went from Caterham to, first of all, work in Enstone with Lotus. Subsequently, that became the Renault Formula One team, of course, the Alpine team that we have today. And then you moved from there to Alfa Romeo Racing, to Sauber in Switzerland. What I'm keen to talk to you about is, as you progress through these teams, we've already discussed Toyota and Caterham. then Lotus, now then Alfa Romeo Racing. You're working with different drivers at different points in their career, some at the beginning of their career, some towards the end of their career. How did you approach the task of working with these drivers? Because that relationship between you as a performance engineer and them is, it's like a marriage. It's pretty critical in terms of how it works, the way you communicate, the way you understand each other. How did you find that challenge?
I loved it. I mean, to me, and I often get asked this question, a good race engineer has to have the technical knowledge, obviously, to understand what an aero guy says, what an engine guy says, what a tire guy, you know what I mean? You need to have this knowledge, but for me, you need to be an excellent communicator. And you need to build this trust relationship with the driver, when the driver will only look at you without talking, and you know what you have to do on the car just by looking at his facial expression or his gesture, you know what I mean? And yes, you're right, it's a bit like a marriage couple where, you have fight, you have good time, and but it's never personal. I mean, with Kimi, how many times he shouted at me on the radio because his bloody drink was not working, you know what I mean? It's not like I get it personally, but they are high performing human, and we work in a very stressful environment where you're being judged every race weekend, every other week by the whole world. So you need to perform, and the way I always work with my driver was to build the trust and to always tell them the truth. That's important because, as you know, there is a lot of politics in F1. Sometimes managers like to hide information to don't get in trouble. And me, I was always telling them the truth. You know what I mean? So, for example, you're missing a part or you forgot a part, you have to go straight. Listen, this is what happened. We forgot that. We didn't get that on time. We will get in next race. But if you start to hide information, the driver will feel it and you will lose this trust. You know what I mean? So, again, communication and trust are the fundamental part to excel at this job.
How often did you feel like you were more a psychologist than an engineer?
Most of the time. I remember having Marcus Ericsson coming to my house, and I invited him to my house in Lyon. I was living in Switzerland. I completely forgotten it was Valentine's Day. So I called my wife, say, shit, is that okay? I mean, if Marcus comes, he's on his own, you know what I mean? But he really appreciates the gesture, you know what I mean? And we all had a great evening, a great dinner together. And, you need this friendship relationship. And you know what, with all the drivers I worked in the past, I'm talking about Romain, I'm talking about Marcus, I still talk to them, you know what I mean, these days, you know what I mean? So they still haven't forgot. Julian Palmer, I mean, all these drivers were still in very, very good relationship. And even if we don't work together, or even if we're not the biggest friend in the world, we still had such a bond at the time that we still have extremely good relationship.
Yeah, I think this is something which too often gets forgotten because in a moment we're going to talk about the data driven aspect of Formula One and how much the technology plays a critical role. But at the end of the day, it's still a human sport in terms of the drivers, the engineers, the mechanics, the team.
Absolutely, they're still human, and you need to react in all the conditions. I remember, again, talking about Kimi, I mean, being mad because this setup or the upgrade we had brought to the track was not working, and then he was literally screaming on the radio. And I remember having this intern, a reliability engineer, telling me, "Oh my God, how do you still manage to calm him down, control the engineer, control the mechanic?" I said, "Well, it's part of my job. I can't get frustrated or being I often say a bad decision is better than a no decision. You need to react. You need to take some decision. You know what I mean? And these are concepts very, very important, and that you could apply to any company in the world.
Talk to me about Kimi because Kimi Räikkönen is, of course, he was a world champion, very enigmatic character. And I mean, I've worked with lots of Finnish drivers. I've never worked with Kimi, but he has an interesting public persona. How did you find him to work with? What were his qualities as a driver?
Well, first of all, Kimi has an incredible talent of feeling what the car does through the steering wheel and through his bottom, basically. He's a very old school driver. Obviously, he liked to watch some data on board and see how he can improve, but he had the feel of the car and the feel of what was happening during a race, what I call the race awareness, what's happening strategy-wise, what the other car are doing. That was completely off the chart. On top of that, I think he could have been a very good race engineer himself because he had a very good understanding of what the car was doing and what he needed to improve the car, So on this point of view, on this side of the story, it was pretty easy to work with him because he knew immediately what he wanted. And he was telling me, Julien, if you can improve me this corner, this braking, this time of the race, I will go quicker. And he was going quicker. You know what I mean? So, what he could feel through the steering wheel was really, really impressive, I think.
Let's talk about the fact that when people are watching Formula One on television or streaming it on their laptop or whatever, one of the first things the drivers always say after practice qualifying is we need to look at the data. And it's always an interesting topic. What are we looking at? So can you maybe give our listeners an insight into what are we looking at in terms of the data that you're acquiring from the car? Because there's a lot of data coming in, so presumably lots and lots of information. What are you looking at, and how do you prioritize what you look at?
Well, it's a data-driven sport. You don't base on judgment. So what was happening, especially when you have a short time like in qualifying or in FP2, the first thing a driver wants to know is a comparison with the teammate. So you are printing or showing on the screen immediately the speed trace, throttle, brake, steering, gears, RPM. So like this, he could have an overlay of where he was losing or gaining compared to his teammate. Plus, on top of that, we had the GPS overlay of all the other cars. So if we wanted, for example, say, compare the speed trace with McLaren or Mercedes, whatever, we had that instantly. So we could see, okay, so we are fighting with McLaren, but they're gaining a lot in high-speed corner. Look, they go 5, 6 kph faster than us in the apex. So that's the kind of information they want to know immediately, basically. After how you filter all that, because as a race engineer, you have to understand I had like tens and tens of channel and intercom channel from people in the factory, people other. So I had like sometimes 20 people talking at the same time, to me. So that was my job to filter the information, because some information were on reliability of the car, which the driver doesn't really care. Some were on performance, how to improve. So that was my job to filter quickly all this info and pass it to the driver. So I was making sure he had the right information at the right time.
So, Julien, tell me about then how we balance the performance management with the risk management, because we've got all this data coming in. You're looking at how you can optimize performance, but there is a risk inherent to Formula One. It's a sport where, unfortunately, we had many fatalities between 1950 and 1994. We've had one driver fatality since then with Jules Bianchi, but the risk management is a critical aspect, both in terms of protecting the driver, but also everyone else who's at a Formula One race. So, can you talk to me a little bit about the risk management aspect and how you, as a performance engineer, are also considering safety each step of the way?
The only time I was really concerned about the safety, for example, when we had a slow puncture. So we have all these sensors inside the tires that were telling us they could detect a slow puncture on the tires or not. And when you go up 300 kph plus, you need to be on it. And we had alarm, we had a lot of things, but most of the time the driver could feel it before you seeing it on the data. You know what I mean? So that was the only time I was a bit concerned about safety. But the rest of the time, our only focus was about performing and trying to go as quick as possible. And I think it's the same for the driver, because if they are worried about safety, they would not drive as quick as they are doing on this incredible machinery. You know what I mean? So that's my view on that.
Yeah. Tell me this, the way in which Formula One has developed in recent years, it's become, as you said, much more data driven. To what extent has the driver's role been affected by this? Do you think the driver is more or less important, or has that not really changed? Because clearly the technology has changed enormously, and yet we continue to see the best talent rise to the top?
Well, I think the technology has simply helped the driver and the team to progress quicker. You know what I mean? I will give you an example. Look at what we have now with the simulator. In 20 years ago, simulator was not even a thing. You know what I mean? Now you have this young driver coming from F2, they jump on the simulator, they're on the track, and they are so realistic that they don't use it only for, let's say, learning the track, but also trying setup changes and correlation and all these kind of things. They really using it as an engineering tool. Speed up massively the progress for the team and also for the driver. So I think technology has just improved and speed track basically this effort for the driver to go from junior category to F1. So in my view, yes, the driver is still important. In F1, you still have the best 20 driver possible in the world, and that hasn't changed. You know what I mean? It's just that they can reach maybe their potential a bit earlier. Look at what Oliver Behrman did in Saudi this year. You know, he jumped from an F2 to an F1 car and immediately is there, but he will have done, tens and tens of hours in a simulator. He knew the steering wheel, he knew the engineer, he knew the procedures. So that before was not existing, and the driver were counting much more on their pure talents than on technology.
Before we wrap up the podcast, Julien, I just want to talk to you about your new career in terms of course, you have your engineering consultancy and you're working in racing still, but you're also, of course, now a broadcaster and working in Formula One. How have you found the transition into standing in front of the camera with a microphone and having a very different interaction with the sport that you love?
Well, I absolutely loved it. I remember the first gig I did was in Canada in 22 with Canal Plus, the French broadcaster, and basically he went pretty much straightforward. We arrived in the pit lane. They give me a micro. The cameraman arrived and they say, "Here we go. You're in the pit lane. So describe what you can see and help us to understand your job, what you're doing before." And it was very seamless. You know what I mean? Because I think the important thing is that I obviously knew what I'm talking about because I know the technical bits, but the challenge in TV is to translate that into words that everyone could understand. If you start to go into complicate formula, and you will lose half the people. So the challenge in TV is really to make sure you articulate and you speak relatively slowly and you explain difficult and complex subject in a very easy way to understand for everyone. So that was my biggest challenge, basically. That and not using English word when I was with the French broadcaster, because most of the technical words are in English. So actually, I did not even know the French translation for it. So that was an additional challenge.
That's very funny. Well, Julien, I really appreciate you joining our podcast. Thank you so much for your insights today, and we wish you every success for the rest of this season.
Thanks a lot for having me.
Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe to the Business of Winning podcast. And if you want to learn more about performance insights, simply visit our website at performanceinsights.co.uk, providing expert speakers and hosts from the world of Formula One motor racing to corporate events and conferences worldwide.